In terms of air rail at the airport, our fundamental problem is a lack of trains in the early hours, which excludes some 2 to 3 million passengers from even considering rail today. I just wondered if you saw any opportunities in the upcoming Thameslink franchise to see improvements.
Well, as you'll appreciate, at the moment, the Thameslink franchise is frozen, as are all franchises on hold till we sort out the situation with regard to the West Coast Mainline franchise. But having said that, I think ultimately it will be a matter for the train operators to determine what services should be provided to meet the needs of passengers, whether they are ones that want to travel to the airport or other passengers within the franchise area, whoever's successful in that franchise. And my advice would be that whoever holds a franchise must listen acutely and carefully to the demands and representations for additional services to ones that might be being provided at the moment, and they should have an acute ear for what is needed commercially to meet demands. And I would hope that, given that rail operators should be, and I'm sure are, as acute business people as in other areas of business, that they will respond where there is a need to meet that need.
Thank you, Minister. Darren Kaplan, Airport Operators Association. High-speed rail potentially links up Heathrow, Birmingham, Leeds, Manchester, Edinburgh and Glasgow. All places that have airports. The Airports Commission is obviously going to report back in 2015. I'm just wondering if it's wise to push on with high-speed rail without knowing the results of that Airports Commission, because presumably what happens on the connectivity debate, the hub debate, will affect passenger numbers and where you want to put rail. So I'm interested in your views on that, please.
Yes, I think it is important to press on for a very simple reason. The possibility of a spur to Heathrow is in phase 2 of HS2. And so that does not affect phase 1, i.e. from London to Birmingham. Sadly, the way Parliament works and the system works, there has to be legislation through Parliament, which takes time, and there is no reason to delay that to await the Davis Commission long-term report in the summer of 2015. And so I think that we should press ahead, because depending what comes out of Davis and where we go forward there is still time, because, as I say, the spur to Heathrow is part of phase 2.
Just a supplementary to that, do you think that high-speed rail should actually link to the airport? So obviously it links Heathrow, potentially, it links Birmingham, Leeds, Bradford, Manchester, Edinburgh and Glasgow. If you want a truly integrated system, and from an airport perspective, we'd love to be linked up because it means more people can get to our airports. Interesting views on that.
Well, I think you are, we know the preferred route from London to Birmingham. We do not know yet, or you do not know yet, the preferred route of the Y or HS2. And I would hope that I have a modicum of intelligence and I'm not going to share with you the inner thinkings of my Secretary of State, because I expect that the news would travel faster than it will take for me to get from here to the Department of Transport, and there would be a meeting without coffee awaiting me if I did.
Okay, we've got time for another question. Yeah. Michael first, and then Richard behind.
Michael Shabbos, First Class Partnerships. In 1995, so I guess it's 17 years ago, I did a study for the Department of Transport called the London Airport Surface Access Study. And this was before Heathrow Express had actually gone to Terminal 5. The question was, did it go to Terminal 5? Did it go to Terminal 4? Did it go to Terminal 5 and back up to Reading and so on? And we said, we studied that the right answer was to go to Terminal 5 and then possibly down towards Woking. Nothing came of that beyond, AirTrack sort of thrashed around for a long time, but it was always too slow. But we completely rejected going from there up to Reading because we said there's just not enough traffic, never going to be enough traffic from the west to be worth diverting trains down into Heathrow and then back up onto the main line. It's just going to add a journey. And in fact, if you go to Cologne Airport, you see where they built exactly that. Cologne is a loop off the high-speed line, and they get 6 trains a day. Beautiful station, 4 platforms. The Germans do it in style. It's underground, must have cost a fortune. My question is, why has this government now announced that, and I think I did read the press release was carefully worded, it said subject to validating the business case, you're going to build a western connection from Reading into Heathrow. Do you have some new insight into what it's going to do, or is this just a good sort of thing to promise because you know when it comes to validating the business case, it won't be validated, so you won't have to build it? So, which is it?
Well, it certainly isn't the latter, because that would be an utter waste of everyone's time. You are talking about something that was looked at 17 years ago, and life has moved on. And we do believe that there is a need and a case for a spur link from Great Western into Terminal 5, which will then join up with the other terminals. And £500 million is committed to it. It will be built by 2020, 2022, if my memory is right. And we believe that there is demand there for people travelling from South Wales, the South West, Bristol, the Cotswolds, and that there is a case for it. And it won't, the projection is that it won't come directly from Reading itself. It will come off the line somewhere, probably between Langley and Iver, and go straight into Terminal 5, and certainly the latter part of the route will be tunnels. And we do think there is a case for it.
Can I just take you back to your answer to the question about train services at Luton, where you said this should really matter for the commercial judgment of rail operators? We heard this morning, before you got here, about some of the things that have happened to the Gatwick Express, which can clearly be traced back to decisions by the department, rather than those that the operator might like to have taken for themselves. And it's all about the sort of prescriptive nature of the franchise arrangements that we've had up to now. Is there any prospect, do you think, after this review, that we might get to something that was less prescriptive, where commercial freedoms might be more widely recognised, and perhaps sensible decisions taken? And I won't bore you now with all the unsensible decisions that have been taken around Gatwick Express, but I can assure you there are many.
I'll take your word for it. On the latter part, I don't want to avoid your question, though you might be thinking well, that's what politicians always do. But you place me in a slightly difficult position to give you a straightforward answer at this stage. The reason being, as you'll be aware, as a result of the problems over the West Coast, the Secretary of State set up an inquiry under Richard Brown of Eurostar to look at the whole issue of franchising, how it's delivered in the Department for Transport, and what lessons we can learn from what happened over the West Coast, and what improvements, fine-tuning needs to be taken. I can't prejudge what Richard Brown's report is going to come up with, what recommendations he may or may not make. We have got to wait. He is going to report back to us by the end of December, I suspect, probably before Christmas because of the Christmas break. And we will then study very carefully what he has found, what he thinks, what he may or may not recommend, reflect on that, and then take what necessary action is needed to improve and enhance the system across the whole board of franchising. And we will have to wait and see, for example, if he is going to deal with the very issue that you have raised, as well as a number of other issues that seem to have flowed from the experience of the West Coast episode.
Minister, there's many commercial organisations, the ones that were referred to, waiting for the franchise process to get going again. We know the timescale for the Richard Brown report, as you mentioned, by the end of the year. Could you estimate when the process might get going again after the review of the report? What sort of timescales that might be?
At this stage, it is difficult. I mean, look, I would like to assure you as much as I can, or reassure you even, that we want to start the franchise process again as quickly as possible. But we also cannot afford to waste this opportunity of the Brown inquiry and take shortcuts just simply for the sake of moving forward quickly and making mistakes or not fully embracing the opportunities. So what we plan to do is when we get the report, we will look at it very carefully. We don't want to sit on it for months and months, years and years, you know, reinventing the wheel and then moving forward. But we will have to give it serious consideration. We will have to give serious consideration to how we make any improvements if they are necessary and recommended. But the bottom line that will be the driving force is that we are as anxious as the rail industry and others to move forward as soon as it is safe and sensible to do so.
Okay, we just have time for, I think, probably one more question.
Hi, Paul Simmons from EasyJet. Interesting what you're saying about the air travel and how it drives the economy and growth, and clearly we believe in that too. Taking Gatwick as an example, we now have, we're flying 100 routes into Gatwick, we're flying 14 million passengers, about half of those are business routes, multi-frequency business routes bring people in. And we try as hard as we can to get people to travel by train to make sure access is as smooth as possible. So it's really not helpful for us when they people get on a Gatwick Express to find it's a commuter train from Brighton. So going forward, I know you may not want to comment directly, but just your general view on whether Gatwick Express should be a dedicated service for the airport or part of the network, part of the commuter service into Brighton.
Well, slightly depending on how I answer that question, you can then interpret on what I think what the franchise should be. Look, there are problems. I mean, at the moment, there are 4 dedicated trains an hour non-stop to Gatwick. It's also a very busy commuter line from Brighton and all points towards London, and there is a significant problem with it at the moment because the Brighton line has significant capacity problems, and there is significant standing room only journeys for people using that, whereas on the other side of the coin there are Gatwick Express trains which have empty seats in them, which, you know, logically, and I'm just saying logically, I'm not saying this should necessarily happen because I'm trying to walk a very tight line in answering your question. Logically, one should possibly look at it to see if there's ways of remedying that. But ultimately, it will be up to the train operators to seek to establish a balance that meets the requirements as far as they can of both types of traveller. The traveller who is wanting a dedicated service simply to Gatwick because of the airport, and the passengers who need and want to travel Brighton to London, London to Brighton, either because of their work commitments or for other reasons of coming to the capital. It will be a balancing act, but ultimately the operators will have to look into that and reach conclusions.
Sorry to be a pain. Just one final point. I suppose in terms of strategically we're trying to get air rail connections as smooth as possible. Isn't it part of potentially a government, almost a directive or requirement, to actually make sure those connections are as smooth and easy as possible? So just as your answer regarding Luton and this answer on Gatwick, wouldn't it be for government to say these services have to have some integrity and be direct services feeding the airports to make the air travel experience as smooth as possible, rather than say leave it to the train operator?
Well, it's both, because yes, of course, the government wants to improve and enhance the services of getting passengers by rail into airports, whether it's Gatwick, Heathrow, Stansted, Luton, or other airports around the country. That is important, and that is why we are investing so much in improving the rail links, whether it's Crossrail or a spur into Terminal 5 from the Great Western Line, or improving the access points with Metrolink or the railways into Manchester, etc., etc. But also there is a role for the operators to play with, because they've also got to identify within their commercial setting and their quality of service, balancing in some of those instances with a competing clientele, and this applies particularly to Gatwick, of commuters commuting to work or whatever, and the capacity problems there are with that service compared to the capacity of the trains going from Victoria down to Gatwick as part of the Gatwick Express. And they should be sensitive to those balancing interests.
Okay, well, thank you very much, Minister. Thank you for answering all of our questions, and I'm sure there would be many more, but I know you've got to move on to your next appointment now. So please again show your appreciation for...
Thanks very much.